As my car rolls out of the workshop and into the desolate wasteland, I'm instantly reminded of leaving Vault 101 or Helgen's Keep for the very first time. The blinding lights, the seemingly endless horizon, the buggy NPCs, it's all present and accounted for. Much like Bethesda's open-world RPG greats, Cyberpunk did a fantastic job of dropping me into the role of its protagonist V. Upon tailoring his appearance to my liking and assigning a handful of attribute points, I was then asked to choose from one of the game's much-touted life paths. These help give V a backstory, filling in some of the blanks before you take the wheel. They also determine which of the game's 3 introductions you'll play through. It's one of the few ways the game hands power to the player, and I personally think it's a terrific feature. Out of the 3 life paths available, Corpo, Street Kid and Nomad, I chose the latter. Being unfamiliar with Cyberpunk and its tabletop roots, beginning my journey as an outsider felt like the most appropriate choice. Nomads were forced to leave their previous lives behind, and now roam the outer limits in convoys of creatively modified vehicles. Think Mad Max, minus the chrome paint and fanaticism. Witness! After meeting with my contact, smuggling an iguana across the border, and watching a brief montage, I was finally let loose upon the neon-drenched jewel in Cyberpunk's crown, Night City. From the grandiose of Corporate Plaza to the claustrophobic streets of Kabuki, each district organically intertwines with the next, all whilst retaining its own visual identity. Nearly every part of the city pops with colour, and architecture is used to great effect. Towering mega buildings contrast starkly with the urban jungle below, creating a phenomenal sense of depth and verticality. It's the perfect spot for some virtual tourism, granted that you come equipped with more than just a camera. Night City is easily one of the most detailed cities I've ever seen in a video game, and acts as a stunning backdrop to the various dealings you'll get up to here. It's just disappointing that the moving parts don't quite match the set dressing. Civilians and NPC-controlled vehicles are the biggest offenders here, as they move along a very rigid set of rails, closely resembling a colony of ants, rather than a sporadic bustle of a real-life commute. It's fitting in a game about people being cogs in the corporate machine, though in reality, I think it's less an act of social commentary and more the result of doing the bare minimum. One moving part that doesn't fare quite as badly are the vehicles controlled by the player. Admittedly, some of the sportier models were a bit dull to operate, but hopping into a compact ride and hurling it around corners made traversal considerably more entertaining. These nimble-natured motors and their tendency to oversteer actually prove beneficial when navigating via the minimap. This useless navigational aid is zoomed in far too close for comfort, and as a result turns are often hard to anticipate. For anyone hoping for vehicle customization, this is sadly absent from the game, though there is enough visual variety in the vehicles that you're sure to find something that suits your style. When driving around the city, you'll be treated to one of the best in-car radios in recent memory, with an abundance of genres including techno, metal, jazz and reggae. Being a lover of hip-hop, I naturally gravitated towards The Dirge, with highlights from Conrad Old Money and Run the Jewels. However, a surprising amount of mileage was also spent with Moro Rock Radio and the in-game band Samurai. Not being content with designing a fictional rock band and writing a whole story arc around them, CD Projekt Red worked closely with the very real Swedish punk band Refused to produce 5 full-length tracks for the group. These can be heard both in and out of the game, as they were released intermittently on streaming platforms leading up to the release of the game. It's a fairly minor inclusion, but one that contributes heavily towards making Night City a more tangible place. I only wish that the radio didn't have to stop every time I left my vehicle. After Watch Dogs first introduced me to its Music Anywhere feature, I've longed for other games to adopt a similar approach. Enjoyable as it was to take in the sights and sounds, I did occasionally have to turn my attention back to the main questline. Although initially an inviting prospect, Night City is far from a safe haven. Crime is rife, and warring factions fight for control of the streets against iron-fisted law enforcement and tyrannical megacorporations. Playing the part of V, it's your goal to rise above the rabble and emerge as a legend among your fellow mercenaries. The game's opening asks you to steal a technological equivalent of the Holy Grail, more commonly referred to as the Relic, a chip capable of storing a digitized version of the human soul. This serves as Cyberpunk's answer to immortality, being able to place the chip into a suitable body which has recently expired, allowing the psyche to live on in a new host. It's all very reminiscent of Richard Morgan's Takeshi Kovacs novels. But after the high-stakes heist goes horribly wrong, you barely escape with your life, and are left with Keanu Reeves' egotistical rock boy, Johnny Silverhand, living rent-free in your head. As this mind ain't big enough for the both of you, complications soon arise, and the events that follow see you race against the clock in order to remove the ghost from your shell. Having an invisible timer hang over my head was one of the biggest gripes I had with the main questline. This artificial urgency placed upon the player felt totally at odds with the explorative framework the rest of the game is built upon. I frequently find myself torn when choosing the next destination. I can engage exclusively with the storyline and witness Johnny and V's journey unfold as the writer intended, or attend to my growing list of side quests and have the narrative suffer as a result. Urgency can be used to great effect for the purposes of building tension, but this is better suited to linear action adventure titles like Uncharted. In an open world game where freedom is encouraged, it makes for a jarring ordeal. It's so easy to forget about the impending threat to my own mortality when I'm playing taxi cab for a man with malfunctioning genitalia.
Look.
Go! Just go mow him down!
Chill, June. Be gone in a sec.
It's ironic then that this game should borrow so heavily from the same genre as Nathan Drake's treasure hunting exploits. With choice being king in the earlier hours, I was sorry to see it quickly overruled by a restrictive and straightforward experience. Main quests hold the player's hand far too tightly and lack any room for experimentation. If you do wish to stick to a certain playstyle such as stealth, you'll have to contend with unavoidable combat situations like the clunky and unimaginative boss battles. Choices are present in the game, but they rarely carry any weight. Consequences from my actions are either subtle or non-existent, and mostly confined to the quest at hand. When such a big emphasis was placed on Life Pass, it was frustrating to watch their gradual descent into irrelevance, essentially being boiled down to additional dialogue options that did nothing to move the conversation forward. Regardless, Cyberpunk tells an intriguing cautionary tale, one of humanity playing God with technology, and the ethical quandaries that provokes. It also explores other mature themes such as societal division, mental illness, and accepting the loss of a loved one. It's a shame then that you have so little influence over how the events unfold and the way in which you complete each objective. It abruptly stopped being my story and instead felt like I was playing the role of spectator rather than that of the protagonist. Although this wasn't what I had initially signed up for, I still saw the story through to the end credits. With a phenomenal score and some convincing voice work from Gavin Dre, I was able to better connect with the storyline on an emotional level, as haunting violin sections complemented V's anxious tones and fragile state.
You're the best of the best, Vic. Why can't you help me?
Mostly composed of electronic arrangements, the accompanying soundtrack swells when events reach their peak, before simmering down to provide a suitable ambience when its absence is more fitting. Despite its detriment to the main narrative, straying from the beaten path provided me with some of the finest moments the game had to offer, whether exploring a sunken suburb that was once a childhood residence, or playing cops and robbers with an NCPD detective and his family. Each experience with a stellar supporting cast was intimate and memorable. Largely thanks to some excellent animation work and lip-syncing prowess, Cyberpunk has triumphed in bringing its characters to life. For a game where its residents are more metal than an Iron Maiden concert, they're capable of displaying a whole range of human emotion. No interaction ever felt stilted. Grief, joy, anger. It's all on show here, and it's done in an authentic fashion, with the lip-syncing and facial animations owing a lot to the new Jali software. Jali takes individual vocal performances and automatically generates facial movements based upon what they are saying, taking into consideration the volume, the tone, and even the language. This latter feature benefits from Jali the most, as it means you no longer have to put up with a voice dubbed over a mouth that clearly isn't speaking your language. As well as providing superior storylines, the wealth of side content also provides some of the best gameplay. Cyberpunk primarily plays out as a first-person shooter, offering avenues for stealth and melee. I leaned heavily towards the stealthier elements, and unlike the claustrophobic main missions, the adventures on the side afforded me a bit more room to breathe. When tasked with stealing data from a corrupt politician, I could gung-ho my way through the front doors, or sneak in from a rooftop access and escape unseen. It took me back to my time with Deus Ex, crawling through vents and hacking computer terminals. Hacking is initially quite fun, even if the novelty wore off fast. It would have been nice to have some contextual options for the various systems you'll crack. For example, password-protected laptops could have an anagram to solve, similar in essence to the Batman Arkham series. If you have any intention of playing with the game's net-running options, expect to spend an awful amount of time looking at this screen. Opt for a less subtle approach, and there's a lot of fun to be had experimenting with some fairly unique hardware. Guns are tactile and weighty, with shotguns being a personal favourite, though I did find the balancing to be a bit of a mixed bag. Power weapons can ricochet around cover to hit a cowering enemy, but this takes time and can be cumbersome. Smart weapons are usually the better option here, as they hardlock onto your enemies and provide a satisfying homing effect for your bullets. Tech weapons, on the other hand, break the game entirely, as their ammunition penetrates any surface, turning you into a warbanging assassin. I rarely opted for tech weapons, as they felt a bit cheap. I want to be completely honest here and say that I spent very little time with the melee combat outside of the opening tutorial. Combos, blocking and parrying are all present, and there seems to be a good amount of weaponry strewn about the world. But me and first-person melee combat rarely get along. This doesn't weigh against the game, as it's purely a personal issue and in no way reflects upon the potential fun to be had slicing and dicing through Night City. What made each task especially excellent, though, was the context provided for each one. Everything has a purpose here, and it's not just shoehorned in for the sake of it. Even down to the micro missions that see you taking out a high-profile target or rescuing a hostage. They all come with a briefing, accessible via your phone, and help expand on what would usually be a run-of-the-mill activity. Much like the game's central protagonist V, Cyberpunk suffers from a bit of an identity crisis. While the versatile character creation tools and strong opening act allude to a more faithful adaptation of their tabletop roots, the frenetic main questline that follows is a true representation of the action-adventure genre. Heavily scripted set pieces and a lack of player agency certainly left me disheartened, but its diverse side content, electrifying score, and thoughtful approach to world design were more than enough to save me from cyberpsychosis.
Like it like this,